While I was away on a trip, my daughter-in-law bought a $5,000 vase in my name. To compensate for the burden of having you in our lives, she wrote. The shock came when I tripled her rent. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The envelope trembled in my hands as I stared at the credit card statement. There it was, in stark black and white, $5,000 charged to Wentworth's fine. Antiques. I hadn't purchased anything from there. I hadn't bought anything that expensive in years. My heart pounded as I scanned the rest of the bill. Everything else looked normal. My grocery purchases, the monthly donation to the library, a few small indulgences at the bookstore. But that $5,000 charge stood out like a scream in a silent room. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers and dialed the credit card company. Yes, there was a purchase made at Wentworth's, the customer service representative confirmed. It was picked up in person. The card was present and the purchase was authorized with your PIN. My PIN? That was impossible. I kept my PIN written down in my diary, hidden in my... The realization hit me like a slap. Natalie had been in my house while I was away visiting my sister in Maine. Patrick had insisted she needed to water my plants, though I'd told him the neighbor would do it. Natalie wants to help Mom, he'd said. Let her do this for you. I hung up and drove straight to Wentworth's, the small, exclusive antique shop downtown. The bell jingled merrily as I pushed open the door, a sound that felt jarringly at odds with the sick feeling in my stomach. Mrs. Calloway, how nice to see you again, the owner greeted me warmly. Again? I'd never been in this shop in my life. Your daughter-in-law has excellent taste, he continued, oblivious to my confusion. That Ming Dynasty reproduction vase was one of our finest pieces. I forced a smile, though I felt anything but happy. Could you tell me when it was purchased? Last Thursday, around noon. Your daughter-in-law said it was a surprise for you, he chuckled. She mentioned you'd be thrilled. Thrilled. I nodded mechanically and asked for a copy of the receipt. The owner seemed surprised but complied. There at the bottom was my signature, or, rather, a reasonable facsimile of it. I drove to Patrick and Natalie's house. My house technically, since I owned it and rented it to them at a fraction of what it was worth. I'd bought the property as an investment years ago, and when Patrick and Natalie were struggling financially after their wedding, I'd offered it to them at a rate they could afford. Just until you get on your feet, I'd said. That was 5 years ago. The house looked immaculate as always. Natalie prided herself on appearances. I knocked and she answered, her perfect smile faltering slightly when she saw me. Anne, what a surprise. Patrick's not home from work yet. I'm not here to see Patrick, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I'm here about this. I held up the receipt. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Oh, that. Surprise! She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's in the living room. There it was, displayed prominently on the mantel. A blue and white vase, ornate and undeniably beautiful, and undeniably not mine. Why would you buy this in my name? I asked quietly. Natalie's smile thinned. I left you a note with it. Didn't you find it? I hadn't been home yet, having gone straight from the credit card company to the antique shop to hear. What note? She sighed as if I were being difficult, and walked over to a drawer in the side table. She pulled out a cream-colored envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a card with flowing script. To compensate for the burden of having you in our lives, the least we could do. Natalie. The words hit me like physical blows. Burden. The least we could do. Each syllable dripped with contempt. I don't understand, I whispered, though I was beginning to understand all too well. It's simple, Natalie said, her voice light but her eyes cold. You've done so much for us, letting us stay in this house practically for free. It must be such a burden for you to help us out. I wanted to give you something in return." Her words were honey-coated poison. The vase wasn't a gift. It was a statement. A power play. And she'd bought it with my own money. I thought about the years I'd spent helping them, the reduced rent, the money I'd lent Patrick for his business venture that never got repaid, the countless hours of free childcare for their son, my grandson, while they went on weekend getaways. And this was how Natalie saw me. As a burden. I folded the note carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Something cold and determined settled in my chest. "I see," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for clearing that up." I left without another word, the image of that vase, my vase, paid for with my money, burning in my mind. As I drove home, my thoughts weren't on the $5,000 or the fraudulent charge. They were on the years of subtle disrespect, the dismissive glances, the way Natalie spoke over me at family gatherings. For the first time, I saw it all clearly, and I knew things couldn't continue this way. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold and made a decision. If Natalie thought helping family was a burden, she was about to learn what a real financial burden felt like. Couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Natalie's smug expression, heard her honeyed voice calling me a burden. I got up at dawn and pulled out the old photo albums from the closet. There was Patrick as a baby, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. Patrick at 8, missing his front teeth, proudly holding up a fish he'd caught with his father. And then the last photo of the three of us, taken 2 weeks before Robert's heart attack. My husband's arm was around me, Patrick between us, all of us smiling without any idea of what was coming. After Robert died, it was just Patrick and me against the world. I was only 43, with a 12-year-old son to raise alone. I'd worked 2 jobs, teaching during the day and bookkeeping at night, just to keep our house and put food on the table. The life insurance hadn't been much, but I'd saved every penny for Patrick's college fund. I flipped through more pages. Patrick's high school graduation, where I'd sat alone, clapping until my hands hurt as he received his diploma. His college graduation, where I'd spent money I couldn't really afford on a new dress, so I would look nice in the photos. I was so proud of him that day. Then came photos of Patrick and Natalie's wedding. I remembered how I'd given them my diamond earrings, the ones Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary, as a wedding gift. Natalie had smiled, said they were charming in a vintage way, and I'd never seen her wear them once. I closed the album and made myself another cup of tea. The kitchen was quiet, just the ticking of the old clock Robert had fixed right before he died. In this same kitchen, I'd taught Patrick to make pancakes. I'd helped him with his homework. I'd listened to his heartbreaks and celebrated his successes. After the wedding, Patrick had changed. At first, I thought it was just newlywed adjustment, but gradually, the phone calls became less frequent. When we did talk, Natalie was always there, monitoring the conversation. Patrick would start to share something about work or his life, and Natalie would cut in with, "Patrick, your mother doesn't want to hear about that." But I did want to hear. I wanted to hear everything about my son's life. I remembered the day they'd told me Natalie was pregnant. I'd been overjoyed at the prospect of a grandchild. I'd offered to help in any way I could. "We don't need your help," Natalie had said firmly. "We've got it covered." But when little Robert was born, suddenly they did need me. They needed a free babysitter. Natalie's mother lived in Florida and only visited twice a year, so I became the on-call grandmother. I didn't mind. I loved spending time with my grandson. But it hurt when Natalie would return from her day out shopping or at the spa and barely acknowledge my presence. "Oh, you're still here," she'd say, as if surprised to find me in their home. after I'd spent 8 hours caring for their child. I sipped my tea and stared out the window at the sunrise. 5 years ago, when Patrick and Natalie were struggling financially, I'd offered them the rental property I'd bought with my retirement savings. It was a nice house in a good neighborhood, worth much more than the modest amount I charged them in rent. Just until you get on your feet, I'd said. But they never got on their feet, not really. Patrick's job paid well, but Natalie didn't work, and their expenses always seemed to exceed their income. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, the latest electronics. Meanwhile, I lived simply in the same house where I'd raised Patrick, driving a 10-year-old car and buying clothes on sale. I never complained. I was happy to help my son. But now I wondered if I'd done too much. Had I enabled a sense of entitlement? Had my generosity been mistaken for weakness? There had been small signs over the years, moments when Natalie's mask had slipped. The time she'd accidentally broken my mother's china teacup, the only thing I had left of my mother's. The way she rearranged my furniture when she visited, without asking, as if my taste was embarrassing. The comments about my clothes, my hair, my cooking, always delivered with a smile but designed to cut deep. That dress is so sensible, Anne. It's good you're comfortable with how you look at your age. Your hair is so consistent. You've had the same style for what, 20 years? This casserole is interesting. I guess cooking wasn't really emphasized in your generation. Each comment was a paper cut, small but painful. And over the years, they had accumulated into a wound that never quite healed. And then there was Patrick, standing by, saying nothing. Sometimes he'd give me an apologetic glance, but he never contradicted his wife, never defended me. My son, who I'd raised to be kind and respectful, watched silently as his wife chipped away at his mother's dignity. I finished my tea and washed. The cup, my movements automatic after years of the same routine. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sometimes I missed the chaos of having a child around, the noise and energy of family life. But what kind of family did I have now? A son who couldn't or wouldn't stand up for me. A daughter-in-law who saw me as a burden. A relationship that felt more like an obligation than a connection. And now this, a $5,000 vase purchased with my money, accompanied by a note that laid bare the contempt Natalie felt for me. It wasn't just about the money, though that was bad enough. It was about the years of disrespect, the small cruelties, the erosion of my place in my son's life. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd never thought I'd need. Henderson Law. Office, a pleasant voice answered. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Henderson. It's about a rental property I own. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet strength of standing up for myself. It was time Patrick and Natalie learned that my generosity had limits, and that some lessons come with a price tag they weren't prepared to pay. Mr. Henderson's office smelled of leather and old books. The attorney himself was in his 60s, with silver hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. I'd known him casually for years. We belonged to the same book club, but I'd never needed his professional services until now. So, Anne, he said after I explained the situation, you want to know your options regarding the rental property? Yes. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. Despite my determination, confrontation had never been my strong suit. I've been charging them well below market value for 5 years now. Mr. Henderson nodded and made a note. And there's no formal lease agreement? Just a month-to-month arrangement? That's correct. I wanted to keep it flexible in case they... I trailed off, not wanting to admit I'd hoped they'd eventually buy their own place. In case circumstances changed? Well, that actually works in your favor. He leaned back in his chair. As the property owner, you have the right to adjust the rent with proper notice. In this state, that's 30 days for a month-to-month tenancy. And there's no limit to how much I can increase it? I asked. Not in this county, no. Some places have rent control laws, but not here. He studied me for a moment. May I ask what you're considering? I hesitated, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Would he think I was being vindictive? But I reminded myself of Natalie's note, of the years of small cruelties, of my son's silence in the face of his wife's behavior. I was thinking of bringing it in line with market value, I said carefully. Mr. Henderson nodded. That's entirely reasonable. Let me look up comparable properties in that neighborhood. He turned to his computer, typed for a few minutes, then swiveled the screen so I could see. These are current rentals in that area. As you can see, similar properties are going for around 3 times what you're charging them. I stared at the numbers, a mix of vindication and guilt washing over me. 3 times what they were paying now. It would be a significant increase, one that would force them to either dip into their savings or cut back on their lifestyle. It's a substantial change, Mr. Henderson said, watching my face. But it's completely within your rights as the property owner. I nodded, thinking of the $5,000 vase sitting on their mantel. Thinking of Natalie's smug smile. Thinking of all the times I'd swallowed my hurt for the sake of peace. I'd like to proceed, I said firmly. Mr. Henderson printed out a formal notice of rent increase. Fill this out, make a copy for your records, and deliver it to them. Make sure you get proof of delivery. Either have them sign acknowledging receipt or send it certified mail. I took the paper, feeling its weight in my hands. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a statement. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself. There's one more thing, I said hesitantly. The credit card charge, the vase. Mr. Henderson's expression grew serious. That's a different matter entirely. Using someone else's credit card without permission is fraud, even if it's family. You could file a police report. The thought made my stomach clench. As angry as I was, did I want to potentially see my son's wife arrested? What would that do to Patrick? To my grandson? I'm not sure I want to go that far, I admitted. He nodded understandingly. There are other options. You could dispute the charge with your credit card company, explaining that you didn't authorize the purchase. Or you could request that Natalie return the vase and get a refund. Neither option felt right. If I disputed the charge, the store owner, who seemed like a decent man, might suffer. And asking Natalie to return the vase would require a confrontation I wasn't ready for yet. Let me think about that part, I said. For now, I'll focus on the rental property. That's wise, Mr. Henderson agreed. One step at a time. When I got home, I filled out the rent increase notice, tripling the amount as the market research suggested. I made a copy for my records, then sealed the original in an envelope. I would deliver it in person tomorrow. That evening, I received a text from Patrick. Mom, are you okay? Natalie said you seemed upset when you visited. My fingers hovered over the phone. There was so much I wanted to say. But this wasn't a conversation for text messages. I'm fine, I typed back. Just had some business to take care of. Okay. A pause, then. Love you, Mom. I stared at those 3 words, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. He did love me, in his way. But he had allowed his wife to disrespect me for years. He had stood by while she chipped away at my dignity, my place in their lives. Love without respect was a hollow thing. Love you too, I replied anyway, because despite everything, it was true. The next morning I dressed with care, a simple navy dress that I knew looked good on me, pearl earrings that had been a gift from Robert, light makeup. I wanted to feel strong, confident. I drove to their house, the envelope beside me on the passenger seat like a silent companion. Part of me was dreading the confrontation that might follow, but another part, a part that had been silent for too long, was eager for it. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the money. Not really. It was about standing up for myself, about saying, I matter. My feelings matter. My dignity matters. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw Natalie's car, but not Patrick's. Good. This was between her and me, at least for now. I picked up the envelope, checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, and stepped out of the car. With each step toward their front door, my front door technically, I felt more certain. For the first time in years, I was taking back control, and it felt right. Natalie answered the door in yoga pants and a designer tank top, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Her expression shifted from surprise to wariness when she saw me. "Anne, I wasn't expecting you. I need to speak with you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course. I was just about to have some tea. Would you like some?" "No, thank you. This won't take long." I followed her into the living room, noticing that the vase was still prominently displayed on the mantel. My vase, bought with my money, showcasing her contempt. "Is something wrong?" Natalie asked, settling onto the couch, crossing her legs elegantly. "I have something for you." I handed her the envelope. She took it, eyebrows raised. "What's this?" "Open. She slid her manicured finger under the flap and pulled out the notice. I watched her face as she read it, saw the moment comprehension dawned. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Her cheeks flushed. "This is a joke, right?" She looked up at me, her voice tight. "It's not a joke. It's a formal notice of rent increase, effective in 30 days. She stood up, the paper clenched in her fist. "You're tripling our rent? Just like that?" "I've done some research. It's the current market value for a property of this size and location." "Market value?" She laughed, a harsh sound. "We're family, not some random tenants." "Yes, we're family," I agreed calmly. "Which is why I've been charging you 1/3 of what I could have for the past 5 years. I've been subsidizing your lifestyle, Natalie. And I've done it gladly, because I wanted to help Patrick. But things change. This is about the vase, isn't it?" She crossed her arms. "I was doing something nice for you, and now you're punishing us." "Nice?" I raised an eyebrow. "You used my credit card without permission to buy yourself a $5,000 decoration and left a note calling me a burden. That's not my definition of nice." Her face hardened. "You've always been so judgmental. Nothing we do is ever good enough for you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I, who had given and given without complaint, was being called judgmental by the woman who criticized everything from my clothes to my cooking. "This isn't about judgment," I said. "It's about respect and boundaries." "Patrick will never agree to this," she said, waving the notice. "When I tell him what you've done—" "By all means." "Tell him," I interrupted. "Tell him everything, including how you used my credit card and what you wrote in that note." Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Had she not told Patrick about the vase? About the note? The front door opened, and Patrick's voice called out, "I'm home. The meeting finished early." Natalie's gaze darted to the hallway, then back to me. "Don't do this," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Think about what it will do to the family." Before I could respond, Patrick appeared in the doorway. "Mom, what a nice surprise." He came over and kissed my cheek, then noticed the tension in the room. "What's going on?" Natalie quickly folded the notice and slipped it into her pocket. "Nothing important. Your mom just stopped by to chat." I looked at her, then at my son. In that moment, I had a choice. I could call Natalie out, force the confrontation, or I could let her break the news to Patrick in her own way, in her own time. "Actually," I said, "I came to deliver something, a notice that I'm adjusting the rent to reflect current market value." Patrick's face registered confusion. "Adjusting the rent? By how much?" "It's going up to $3,600 a month," I said, watching his expression. His eyes widened. That's triple what we're paying now." Yes, I confirmed. I've been subsidizing your housing costs for 5 years. I'm not in a position to do that anymore. But Mom, that's... Patrick ran a hand through his hair, looking bewildered. That's a huge increase. We can't afford that on such short notice. You have 30 days to make arrangements, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. I'm sure with both your incomes you'll manage. Natalie made a small sound, and Patrick glanced at her. Natalie doesn't work, he reminded me, as if I might have forgotten. Perhaps it's time she considered it, I suggested. Natalie's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. You can't just blindside us like this. We have a child. Yes, little Robert. My grandson. I smiled, genuinely fond of the 4-year-old who bore my late husband's name. How is he? He's fine, Patrick said automatically, still looking stunned. Mom, can we talk about this? There must be some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said. I've been charging you well below market rate for years. That was my choice, and now I'm making a different choice. It's my property, and this is a business decision. Business decision? Natalie's voice rose. We're your family. Yes, and families should respect each other, I replied, looking her directly in the eye. Families shouldn't take advantage of each other. Patrick looked between us, confusion etched on his face. What's really going on here? Did something happen? Natalie stepped forward quickly. Nothing happened. Your mother is just being difficult. Actually, I interrupted, something did happen. Why don't you show Patrick the vase, Natalie? The one on the mantel. Tell him where it came from. Show him the note you left with it. Patrick turned to look at the vase, then back at his wife. What vase? What note? Natalie's face had gone pale. It's nothing, just a misunderstanding. It's a $5,000 vase that Natalie purchased using my credit card without my permission, I said quietly. And she left a note saying it was to compensate for the burden of having me in your lives. The silence that followed was deafening. Patrick stared at Natalie, then at the vase, then back at his wife. Is that true? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Natalie's face crumpled, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. You don't understand. She's twisting everything. I was trying to do something nice. By stealing from my mother? Patrick's voice was incredulous. I wasn't stealing. I was going to pay her back. And the note wasn't serious. It was just a joke. Natalie's voice had taken on a desperate edge. Show him the note, I said quietly. Natalie didn't move. I walked over to the mantel, reached behind the vase, and pulled out the cream-colored envelope that was still tucked there. I handed it to Patrick. He read it, his face growing increasingly pale. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with confusion and hurt. Natalie, how could you write this to my mother? She's exaggerating, Natalie insisted, tears streaming down. Her face now. It wasn't meant that way. Your mother has always been so critical of me, always judging everything I do. Stop, Patrick said, his voice firm. Just stop. He turned to me, his expression a mixture of shock and apology. Mom, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. The room felt charged with a heavy silence. Patrick stood between us, still holding Natalie's cruel note in his hand, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. I think you both need to talk, I said quietly. I'll go. No, Mom, wait. Patrick's voice stopped me as I turned to leave. Please stay. I want to understand what's been happening. Natalie wiped at her tears, her perfect makeup now smudged. This is all a misunderstanding, she insisted. Anne is blowing everything out of proportion. Am I? I asked, my voice steady. Tell me, Natalie, how should I interpret someone using my credit card without permission and leaving a note calling me a burden? Patrick looked at his wife, waiting for her answer. Natalie's expression shifted, her tears suddenly drying up. Fine, she snapped. You want the truth? I'm tired of pretending. Your mother has been holding this house over our heads for years, Patrick, always dropping little hints about how generous she is, how much she's helping us. I began. But Natalie cut me off. You don't have to say it out loud. It's in every look, every sigh. Poor Patrick and Natalie. They can't manage on their own. Her voice was bitter. So yes, I bought the vase. I wanted something nice for our home, something that showed we weren't charity cases. Patrick shook his head, looking bewildered. Mom has never made me feel that way. Because you're her precious son, Natalie said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But I'm just the interloper who took you away from her. I watched the scene unfold, feeling strangely detached. It was as if years of hidden resentment were finally spilling out like poison from a lanced wound. That's not true, I said calmly. I've only ever wanted Patrick to be happy. I've tried to welcome you into our family, Natalie. By judging everything I do? By criticizing my parenting, my housekeeping, my choices? I blinked, genuinely confused. When have I ever criticized you? You don't have to say anything. It's in your eyes, in the way you purse your lips when you look around our house. Patrick stepped between us. Natalie, that's enough. My mother has been nothing but supportive. She's been charging us 1/3 of what this house is worth for 5 years, and now she's tripling the rent. Is that supportive? Natalie's voice rose. She's trying to drive us out. After you stole from her, Patrick pointed out, his voice hardening. After you left her that note. Do you have any idea how hurtful that was? Natalie's face flushed. It was a joke. It wasn't funny, Patrick said firmly. And it wasn't a joke. You meant it. A tense silence fell. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. The strong, principled young man I'd raised, not the passive husband who deferred to his wife in all things. There's more, I said quietly. They both turned to look at me. This isn't just about the vase or the note. It's about years of small cruelties, of being made to feel unwelcome in your lives except when you needed something from me. I took a deep breath. It's about being treated like a convenience, not a mother or a grandmother. Patrick's face fell. Mom, I never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't, sweetheart, but you allowed it to happen. You stood by while Natalie made comments about my clothes, my hair, my home. You said nothing when she rearranged my furniture during visits as if my taste was embarrassing. You watched her break my mother's teacup, the only thing I had left of her, and accepted her flimsy excuse that it was an accident. Patrick turned to Natalie, his expression questioning. She's exaggerating again, Natalie insisted. I've always been perfectly respectful. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Respectful? Let me remind you of a few things. Last Thanksgiving, you told everyone my stuffing was charming in an old-fashioned way, and then served your own instead. At Robert's 4th birthday, you introduced me to your friends as Patrick's mother, instead of by my name, as if I had no identity beyond my relationship to your husband. Last Christmas, you gave me an anti-aging cream set with a card that said, "Because everyone deserves to look their best." Patrick's eyes widened with each example. I never noticed. You weren't meant to, I said gently. Natalie is careful to make her comments when you're not paying attention, or to frame them as compliments so that I look overly sensitive if I object. Natalie's face had hardened into a mask of resentment. So what if I did? You've never accepted me. You've always looked down on me because I didn't go to college, because I chose to be a stay-at-home mom. That's not true, I said firmly. I've only ever wanted Patrick to be happy, and I've tried to be a supportive mother-in-law despite your constant undermining. Undermining? Natalie let out a harsh laugh. You're the one who's always there, always the perfect mother and grandmother, making me feel inadequate. Do you Have any idea what it's like to compete with St. Anne? Patrick stepped forward. There is no competition, Natalie. She's my mother. You're my wife. I love you both. Natalie's face contorted. Well, you need to choose. Either you support me in this or what? Patrick asked quietly. Or I'll take Robert and go to my mother's, Natalie said, her tone threatening. A heavy silence fell. I looked at my son, saw the pain in his eyes, and my heart broke for him. I hadn't wanted this confrontation to damage his marriage, his family. Despite everything, I didn't want him to suffer. No one needs to go anywhere, I said finally. This isn't about taking sides. It's about respect. All I've ever wanted was to be treated with basic kindness and consideration. Patrick nodded, then turned to his wife. Mom's right. This isn't about sides. It's about how we treat each other. And Natalie, the way you've treated my mother isn't acceptable. Natalie's face crumpled, real tears falling now. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she said, her voice small. I've always felt like I wasn't good enough, like I couldn't measure up to what your family expected. I felt a surprising twinge of empathy. Was that what had been behind the years of small cruelties? Insecurity? No one expected you to be anything other than yourself, I said gently. And to be kind. Patrick put his arm around his wife, but his gaze was firm. We need to make this right, Natalie, starting with apologizing to my mother. Really apologizing. Natalie looked at me, her expression a complex mix of emotions. For the first time, I saw vulnerability there, not just the perfect facade she always presented. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For the vase, for the note, for everything. It wasn't enough, not after years of calculated unkindness, but it was a start. Thank you, I said simply. Patrick turned to me. And Mom, about the rent increase. I held up a hand to stop him. That stands. It's time you both took full responsibility for your lives, without my subsidy. I'll help in other ways, with childcare, with support. But the reduced rent was always meant to be temporary. He nodded slowly. I understand. We'll figure it out. For the first time in years, I felt like my son really saw me. Not just as a mother who would give endlessly, but as a person with feelings, with boundaries, with dignity. And in that moment, something shifted between us, something fundamental and necessary. 3 months had passed since that confrontation in Patrick and Natalie's living room. 3 months of change, of adjustment, of painful but necessary growth for all of us. They had moved out of my rental property 2 weeks after receiving the notice. Not to Natalie's mother's house in Florida as she had threatened, but to a modest apartment closer to Patrick's work. It was smaller than my house, but it was within their budget without my subsidy. I put the property up for rent at market value and found tenants within days. A young doctor and her husband who were delighted with the house and had no trouble affording the rent. The additional income was welcome, allowing me to finally renovate my own kitchen and start a college fund for little Robert. Patrick had called me the day after they moved, his voice tentative. Mom, can we have dinner this weekend? Just the 2 of us? We met at a small Italian restaurant we both loved. When he arrived, I was struck by how tired he looked, but there was something else in his expression, a new maturity perhaps. How are you? I asked as we settled at our table. Busy, he admitted. The apartment is smaller, so we had to downsize a lot. And Natalie? He hesitated. Natalie is looking for a job. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Natalie had always insisted that being a stay-at-home mom was her calling, despite the fact that Robert was in preschool 5 days a week. She has an interview at a design firm next week, Patrick continued. She's actually excited about it, says she needs something that's just hers. That's wonderful, I said, and meant it. Perhaps having her own career, her own identity beyond being Patrick's wife and Robert's mother, would give Natalie the confidence she seemed to lack, the confidence that had driven her to belittle others. Patrick reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A big one." "Patrick." "No, please let me say this." His eyes were earnest. "I let you down. I was so caught up in my marriage and trying to keep Natalie happy that I ignored how she was treating you. I convinced myself that her comments weren't that bad, that you were strong enough to handle it." He shook his head. "But that's no excuse. I should have stood up for you. I should have noticed." I squeezed his hand. "Yes, you should have. But I should have spoken up sooner, too. I was so afraid of losing my relationship with you, with Robert, that I let things slide that I shouldn't have." "You'll never lose me," Patrick said firmly. "You're my mother. I love you." "I love you too," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Always have, always will." We talked for hours that night, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. About his marriage, his career, his hopes for the future. About my life, my friendships, my newfound interest in watercolor painting. It felt like reconnecting with a dear friend after a long separation. "Natalie wants to apologize too," Patrick said as we were finishing dessert. "Properly this time. Would you be willing to meet with her?" I hesitated. Despite everything, I wasn't eager to face Natalie again, but refusing would only create more tension, more division. "Yes," I said finally. "I'd be willing to meet." A week later, Natalie came to my house alone. She looked different, less polished, more natural. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as I showed her into the living room. "Would you like some tea?" I offered. She nodded, and I busied myself in the kitchen, giving us both a moment to compose ourselves. When I returned with the tea tray, she was looking at the family photos on my mantel. "I've never seen this one before," she said, pointing to a picture of Patrick at about 12, proudly holding up a science fair ribbon. "That was the year after his father died," I said, setting down the tray. "He worked so hard on that project. It was the first time I'd seen him really smile since we lost Robert." Natalie's expression softened. "You raised him alone from that age?" "Yes. It wasn't easy, but we managed." I poured the tea. "Patrick was a good boy. He still is a good man." "Yes," she agreed quietly. "He is." She took the cup I offered, her hands trembling slightly. "Anne, I owe you an apology. A real one this time." I nodded but said nothing, waiting. "I've been unkind to you. Disrespectful, ungrateful." She took a deep breath. "The truth is, I've always felt intimidated by you. You're so capable, so sure of yourself. Patrick admires you so much, and I was afraid I could never measure up." "Measure up to what?" I asked gently. "To the woman who raised him alone, who sacrificed everything for him, who built a life and a career without needing anyone's help." Tears welled in her eyes. "Next to you, I felt insignificant." I was stunned. All this time I'd thought Natalie looked down on me, when in fact she'd been intimidated by me. "I never meant to make you feel that way," I said. "You didn't," she insisted. "It was my own insecurity. But instead of dealing with it, I tried to tear you down, make you smaller so I could feel bigger." She wiped at a tear. "It was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." I studied her face and saw genuine remorse there. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means a lot to hear." "I'm trying to change," she said. "The job interview went well. They offered me a position as a junior designer. It's not much, but it's a start." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. "You've always had a good eye for design." She looked surprised at the compliment. "Thank you. I'm nervous but excited too." We talked for another hour, not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two women trying to understand each other better. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still a wariness between us. But it was a beginning. "I'd like for Robert to spend more time with you," Natalie said as she was leaving. "He misses his grandma." I felt a rush of joy at the thought of seeing my grandson more often. I'd like that very much. 6 months later, I sat in the audience at Robert's preschool graduation, watching as the 5-year-olds marched proudly across the small stage in paper caps. Patrick sat beside me and Natalie beside him, both beaming as our little boy accepted his diploma. Afterward, we went out for ice cream, the 4 of us. Robert chatted excitedly about kindergarten, about his friends, about the new puppy Patrick and Natalie had finally agreed he could have. "We have some news," Patrick said as Robert focused on his chocolate sundae. I looked up, curious. "Natalie's been promoted," he announced proudly. "Senior designer after just 6 months." "That's amazing," I said, turning to Natalie. "Congratulations." She smiled, a genuine smile without a trace of the old resentment. "Thank you. And there's more." She glanced at Patrick, who nodded encouragingly. "We're buying a house, a small one, but it's ours." "With both our incomes, we qualified for a mortgage," Patrick explained. "We close next month." I felt a surge of pride in both of them. They were standing on their own feet, building their life together without depending on my subsidy. It was all I had ever wanted for them. "That calls for a celebration," I said. "Maybe I could host a housewarming party. Once you're settled?" "We'd like that," Natalie said, and I could tell she meant it. As we walked to our cars, Robert slipped his small hand into mine. "Grandma, can I come stay at your house next weekend? Daddy said you have paint now." "I do have paint," I confirmed, smiling down at him. "Watercolors. Would you like to learn how to use them?" He nodded enthusiastically. "Mommy says you're really good." I glanced at Natalie, surprised. She shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I saw your painting in the hallway, the one of the sunset. It's beautiful." "Thank you," I said, touched by the sincere compliment. Patrick helped Robert into his car seat, then turned to me. "Love you, Mom," he said, giving me a hug. "Love you too," I replied, holding him tight for a moment. As I drove home, I reflected on the past year, the pain of Natalie's note, the confrontation, the changes that followed. It hadn't been easy for any of us. There had been tears, arguments, difficult conversations. But from that painful honesty had come something valuable: respect. Not just the polite facade of family harmony, but genuine respect. For my boundaries, my feelings, my place in their lives. The $5,000 vase still sat on my mantel. Patrick had insisted I take it, since it had been bought with my money. It was beautiful, certainly, but its true value lay in what it had forced into the open. The hidden resentments, the unspoken hurts, the patterns of behavior that had been slowly poisoning our family. Sometimes, I reflected, the most valuable gifts come disguised as injuries. And sometimes, it takes a moment of crisis to clear the way for healing. I parked in my driveway and looked up at my house, my home. The kitchen windows gleamed with new glass. The garden I'd planted in the spring was in full bloom, and inside, my watercolors waited for me on the table by the window. My life, on my terms. I smiled as I unlocked the door. The price of ingratitude had been high, but the rewards of honesty, of standing up for myself, were proving even greater, and that was worth more than any vase, any property, any amount of money could ever be. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.